I used to find it super hard to plan the studying for a big exam, so like you, I started to create these perfect timetables with this list of things to do every single day. But the reality is that these timetables suck. They never work because it's too easy for you to fall behind, or for a couple topics to take longer than anticipated, and then you have to reschedule everything and it's too much effort and you basically stop bothering with the full thing full stop. So instead, this is what we're gonna do. I have an exam coming up in the next 27 days, 4 weeks, and to be honest, I've not studied much for it at all. So I'm going to show you exactly how I plan and manage this mountain of pretty difficult content, as well as thousands of practice questions that all need to get done. I'm also going to incorporate spaced repetition into my revision, and I'm going to show you how you as well can space out your revisions very smartly. And of course, as usual, this is a fully practical method, so ideally, make your own revision timetable as I speak through it, follow along. That's the best use of this video. The timetable template I'm using is linked in the description below. Now, I mentioned spaced repetition. The reason this is so important to understand is because our brain actually wants to forget as much as possible, to free up as much space as possible. And that's why you forget most of what you study, unless you repeat the topic in spaced intervals. Repeating a topic interrupts that forgetting process of our brain, and doing it at increasing spaced intervals takes it to the next level. But the issue that you and I face, even though we know about spaced repetition, is how to actually practically do it, especially with this humongous ton of topics that we have to get done. Because it's easy to space out 3 topics, but when you have 50 of them, then it becomes a big problem. It's way too impractical to plan and perfectly space them out over months in advance. The solution, however, is simple. Instead of properly trying to go through topics 4 to 5 times each to somehow force it in your brain, I just thought, why not study so effectively at each revision that I can master these topics in 2 or 3 repetitions. Doing anything more than that just isn't worth it. I'd rather spend time doing practice questions. And that's exactly the strategy I've been following the last few years. But it required me to very cleverly plan how I'm gonna space out each of the topics' repetitions in the weeks before the exams. So step 1 is organizing the revision. You start with writing out the full list of topics that you need to cover for your exams. I don't care how hard it is or how boring it is, write all of the topics out. Having it all there in front of you is essential. I did this with all the conditions that I need to know for my exam, and immediately, even though before this I was all over the place, I got a better picture, a better overall perspective of what I need to do. You can finally stop procrastinating and realize, okay, everything I need to do is in front of me. It's manageable. And second, you need to categorize or group all these topics based on how you want to revise them. If you're doing any normal subject, you don't need to do this, just study chapter by chapter. For me this semester, I'm studying a long list of 70 plus conditions that the med school has divided up for us into cases. 12 cases this semester, each of them having like 5 to 7 conditions. And so obviously, I'm not going to track my spaced repetition for all 70 of these conditions, right? Instead, I'm simply going to be using these 12 cases to then track my revision and space it out in my timetable. Just having these 12 things to put on my timetable and using that to space it out makes it very doable. And that's also how I'll be studying on a day-to-day basis, case by case. So group and categorize the subtopics based on what makes sense for you. Step 2, spacing the revision in real time. Now let's put all of these topics onto a revision timetable, and instead of a day-to-day timetable, I'm using a weekly timetable. As you can see, this is divided up into the 4 remaining weeks before my exams on this Google Sheet. I've linked this spreadsheet template below as well. Remember to duplicate it and then you can start editing it for your own revision. When planning in advance like this, I think making a list of things to get done weekly is much smarter than doing it daily, that much far in advance. Firstly, because having a weekly timetable is much easier to stick to. It's more flexible. I find it impossible to plan what I'm doing on a particular day a month in advance. My weeks aren't predictable at the moment. I'm back in Pakistan for 2 weeks and then I'm at placement for the next 3 weeks in Manchester. And the reason it's flexible is because let's say you don't get stuff done on Monday and Tuesday, you get busy, then you're not going to be all of a sudden 2 days behind. You still have the rest of the week to get the remaining tasks done. And that's because you're following a weekly timetable. It's planned to do at any time during that week. Your brain knows it's flexible, so you won't get overwhelmed by being behind. And that means it'll actually end up being a system that you follow in real life. Now let's start with the actual meat of the method. Let's start planning how we're going to do this. Before just taking topics from your list and then putting them on your revision timetable to just get this done with, slow down and take a few minutes to think about the order of how you want to revise this list of topics. i.e., first, tackle the weaknesses, the stuff you don't know, the stuff you've least looked at. This is important because you'll be able to give more repetitions to the stuff you do initially. For me, I've been studying the gastro conditions on here in my placement this month, so it makes sense for me to just do this and finish them off. Then I think I'm going to focus on cardio and I'm going to leave the RESP cases for the end because I did a 9-week rotation in RESP anyways. Next, let's actively plan the revision based on rough spaced intervals. First, let me tell you my spaced repetition formula, and then let's go through exactly how I'm going to space these revision sessions out, these these topics. So listen carefully. My formula is to revise topics on day 1, then do the second revision of the topics on day 4 to 5, and then the third revision 2 weeks later, 14 days. For the easier topics, my aim is usually to even skip that third revision if I can. So for those simpler topics, I'll just do day 1, then day 4 to 5, and then I'll do mixed practice questions after that. It's because, as I said, going through the entire topics again and again is just a waste of time. I know for me that I just need to study better in less revisions and then focus on banging out past med practice questions. I've been following this formula of day 1, day 4 to 5, and then 2 weeks later for years, and it works very well, especially if you have only 1 month to 5 weeks before the exam. Now for the actual spreading and spacing out of the work. The most important thing to understand here, one of the main things that I've learned, is that it isn't really smart to revise all of the topics one by one, and then go back and revise all of the topics again one by one, and then do it the third time as well. I know for a fact that you've done this before, my friends do, I have, but in my experience, you're just bound to forget way more if you don't keep coming back to the topics more often in between, if you're not following that spaced repetition formula. So let's do it smartly. Logically, think about the tasks that you have to get done, and think about the free time you have in the week, and think about what you can realistically do. For me, I know I have these 12 cases. That means in the same week, I know I want to cover a few of these cases each week for the first time, plus do second revisions of the stuff I did earlier that week or the week before. Remember, we want to do the second revisions of them 4 to 5 days after studying them ideally. So realistically here, I'll probably be able to do the first revision of I think 5 cases per week, because I also want to do a few second revision sessions from the things I cover, plus practice questions each day as well. That's probably a good strategy for now. So actually, let me just do it right now in front of you. Let's put on case 11, 10, 9, 8, and 4 in that first week itself, and then cases 5, 7, 1, and 2, and 3 in week 2. Let me just add them on. Now, because I'm only doing the first revisions of 5 cases a week, because I'm spreading it all out across 2 weeks, I've created enough time in each week to do the second revisions of the things I'm revising as well. For example, at this point, I've gone through all my resources and made questions and done my first revision of cases 11 and 10. So their second revision can be done this week itself. Let me just add them on. I also add dates next to each of the sessions that I do so that then I can track them in the future as well. Now, because I did the first revisions of these cases 2 days ago, I know I need to get their second revisions done this weekend itself. The same will apply for cases 9, 8, and 5. I'll be trying to do their second revisions in the next week. And then so on. I don't want to explain one by one. Let me just fill them all in. And I think for this step in this process, I think this is enough. We don't need to fill every single column out and space out every single repetition just yet, because for now I don't know how much I will need to revise or what specifically I will need to revise in week 4 and later on in week 3 even. That's why I've left that entire 4th week blank for now, and even most of 3. I've realized over time that it changes way too much in the later weeks anyways. Over planning right now is useless. I could obviously just show you, yeah, I'm going to perfectly space out these topics in advance using that formula, day 1, day 4, 5, and then 2 weeks later. But the reality is I don't know what I'm gonna find hard at that point in my revision. And that's what's nice about this method and using this revision timetable. As I go through the topics and do revisions, I'll just start adding the dates next to them. So I'll always know, okay, for this case, it's been 2 weeks. Do I need a third repetition? If not, which parts of this case is specifically the thing that I need repetition for? Is it the drugs mentioned? Is it memorizing the guidelines? Do I need to memorize different guidelines of different cases in conjunction? Do I want to combine those study sessions together? There's a very nice quote by Eisenhower that I want to mention. Actual plans are useless, but planning is essential. Revision is fluid, and yes, the thing is, strict, rigid planning at the start is very beneficial, but the actual plan is useless after a while. For me, I change and alter it as I make progress. It will eventually become a retrospective timetable where I'll look back at what I've done, decide what I'm lacking, and what revision that I find and deem more important to do at the moment. And the final step of this process is to make everything as specific as possible. So what I'm doing in each revision session needs to be as specific as possible. Even if it's obvious, or even if I want to change it down the line, it's there to give me specific direction. That first revision, I go through and understand the topic using various resources, and side by side create my recall questions as well. I start forming a mental picture, start to memorize the details that I need to. Then in the second revision session, I actively test myself on these recall questions that I created in that first revision session. I do it even if I don't remember much. I add more questions if I need to. I focus on what I need to actually improve in this topic. And the third revision is more of the same. It's more practice questions, it's more testing myself, it's more actually filling in the knowledge gaps. That brings us on to the final step. Step 3 scheduling the revision. Now that we have a weekly list, the topics are all planned and roughly spaced out in your revision timetable, the final step of the process, and it's crucial to your actual revision day to day, is to spend 2 minutes every day transferring the most important or appropriate tasks from your weekly list into today's calendar. That's it. Use a calendar. You look at your daily schedule. Okay, look at what you're doing. This is busy. I have these 2 gaps. Let me just take 2 minutes to add in the most appropriate tasks, the best tasks that I need to get done that day. Let me show you. For example, I looked at my calendar today. I saw that most of my day was free. I needed to film this video. I had to get a few revision sessions done, and I added those in. I also noticed that it's been a few days since I've done the first revision sessions for cases 10 and 11, so I added those on the Sunday and the Saturday. Practically speaking, this is a very simple step. But the thing that most people don't do is that they don't use their calendar. Just start using your calendar, especially in exam season. Your life isn't going to be only studies. For me, at least, I'm busy with family, friends. I have YouTube stuff going on. I have to script and film. So a calendar is crazy essential to not let the other parts of your life take over and let this very important revision time slip away. And so I'm going to repeat this. Once the weekly timetable is made and you have a good idea of how you're spacing out your topics, then each day take 2 minutes on the toilet or whatever while eating. Just grab a few tasks from this weekly timetable, the ones that are most appropriate for you to do depending on how you're spacing out your revision, and just put them in the gaps within your calendar. I've shown you my this week's calendar too. I've changed nothing on it. It is not perfect. And the reason I'm okay with that is because I never treat these tasks on the calendar as set in stone. The bonus tip here is that I treat my calendar as more of a suggestion for myself that I set at the beginning of the day. That means for me, this stuff is ideally what I should be doing, but there are things that can come up and I can shuffle it around and it's flexible. The weekly timetable, the revision calendar, is actually the important thing to follow. So make sure you're getting everything in that week done. Make that the non-negotiable rather than the daily stuff. And that overall is the actual raw process of how I'm making my revision plan. I've shown you what I did with the topics as I started and how I put them onto the weekly timetable. This is real. This is the plan. This is my plan for the next month. And I wanted to share this video with you like this in this pretty casual way is because I wanted to show you that this is not a perfect method. It's messy. It's pretty intuitive actually and relies on me looking at my workload beforehand, spending 30 minutes or an hour or so thinking about how I'm going to do my first revisions, how I'm going to split my time up in the next few weeks with first revisions, the second revisions, as well as doing the practice questions of the day, so that everything can be covered without sacrificing the aspect of spaced repetition, which is very, very crucial to my revision, I know. And I know I made a very similar video in the past, but it was around a year and a half ago. And even though people found it very helpful, I still feel like it didn't give you the reality of how spacing topics works. I just gave you a formula in that video and expected you to follow it. Whereas me talking through it and showing you kind of a live demonstration gives you a much better idea, or at least I hope it did. I've already made several videos on the science behind spaced repetition and what you can practically do within your study sessions to implement it as well as possible. Check them out right here somewhere. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, spam the comments, help me out with the algorithm, and I will see you in the next one. Oh, and good luck for your exams.